Hey guys, tonight we begin with something remarkable. A place that shouldn't have existed, and yet it did. We're stepping into Greenwood, Oklahoma, in the spring of 1921. A neighborhood so prosperous, so alive with black enterprise and ambition, that outsiders called it Black Wall Street. But forget the headlines and the history books for a moment. Tonight, we're walking those streets before everything changed. Before the smoke, before the planes, before the world tried to erase what 35 blocks of determination had built. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the Frisco Railroad platform in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of the city, it's the smell. Coal smoke from the trains mingles with something sweeter. Maybe cornbread frying somewhere nearby. Maybe the honeysuckle climbing up a fence post along the tracks. The year is 1921, and you've come to Greenwood because someone back home told you this was the place. The place where a black man could own something. The place where a black woman could run a business and have her name painted right there on the storefront window for everyone to see. You've heard the stories, and now you're here to find out if they're true. The Frisco tracks run right through the middle of Tulsa, and that's no accident. On one side sits white Tulsa, with its oil money and its department stores and its laws about where you can and cannot walk after dark. On the other side sits Greenwood. The tracks aren't just steel and wood. They're a border, a boundary, a reminder that America has rules about who belongs where. But here's the thing. On this side of the tracks, something impossible has grown. You cross over and the world shifts. The dirt streets are packed firm from foot traffic and automobile tires. The buildings rise 2 and 3 stories high. Brick and wood frame structures with painted signs advertising everything from groceries to legal services to hot tamales. People move along the sidewalks with purpose, dressed in clothes that would turn heads anywhere. Men in pressed suits and polished shoes. Women in dresses that catch the May sunlight. Children running errands or chasing each other between the storefronts. This is Greenwood Avenue, and it's alive in a way you didn't expect. You've lived under Jim Crow your whole life. You know the weight of it, the way it presses down on your shoulders every time you step outside. You know the drinking fountains you can't use, the restaurants that won't serve you, the hotels that close their doors before you even reach the threshold. You know the look in certain white folks' eyes, the one that says you're less than, you're nothing. You're invisible, except when you're in the way. But walking down Greenwood Avenue, something loosens in your chest. Here, the drinking fountains are yours. The restaurants are owned by people who look like you. The hotel on the corner, the Stratford, that's black-owned too. 4 stories of red brick rising up like a promise. You can walk into any of these establishments and be treated like a customer, like a human being. Like somebody worth serving. The prosperity isn't a rumor. It's right here in front of you, brick by brick, business by business. Within these 35 blocks, there are grocery stores and meat markets, 2 newspapers, a hospital, a library, 2 theaters, a bus system, and over 600 businesses in total. Doctors, lawyers, dentists, real estate agents, all of them black, all of them serving a community that white Tulsa refuses to acknowledge as anything other than a problem, to be contained. But contained isn't the right word. What's happening here isn't containment, it's creation. forced by segregation to build their own world, the people of Greenwood built one worth living in. You find a room at a boarding house on Archer Street, run by a woman named Mrs. Jackson, who insists you call her by her first name, which is also Mrs. Jackson, because she hasn't gone by anything else in 30 years, and she's not about to start now. The room is small but clean, with a metal bed frame, a washstand in the corner, and a window that looks out onto the street below. The wallpaper is faded roses, and the floor creaks when you walk, but the sheets smell like lye soap and sunshine, and there's a pitcher of water waiting for you when you arrive. Mrs. Jackson tells you breakfast is at 6:30, dinner at 6, and if you miss either one, that's your business, but don't expect her to save you a plate. The cost is $3 a week, which is reasonable, and she expects it. Payment on Fridays, because Saturday is for the Lord's business, and Sunday is for rest. That first night, you lie in bed listening to Greenwood breathe. Through the open window comes the sound of laughter from somewhere down the block, the tinny notes of a piano drifting from one of the jazz clubs, the bark of a dog, the rumble of an automobile engine. Somewhere nearby, someone is cooking greens, and the smell makes your stomach growl even though you just ate. The bed springs squeak when you shift, and the pillow is lumpy. But there's something else in the air tonight, something that feels like possibility. You close your eyes and try to imagine what tomorrow will bring. Morning in Greenwood starts before the sun clears the horizon. You wake to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from Mrs. Jackson's kitchen, and by the time you've washed your face and pulled on your clothes, the house is already humming with activity. 2 other boarders sit at the long wooden table in the dining room, shoveling scrambled eggs and grits onto their plates, while Mrs. Jackson presides over the stove like a general commanding troops. She hands you a cup of coffee without asking if you want one, and the first sip is strong enough to make your eyes water. This is not coffee for the faint of heart. This is coffee that expects you to get things done. After breakfast, you step outside into a world already in motion. Greenwood Avenue stretches before you, lined with businesses that are just opening their doors for the day. Shopkeepers sweep the sidewalks in front of their stores. A delivery truck rumbles past, loaded with crates of vegetables for one of the grocers. 2 women walk by carrying baskets, their conversation floating in fragments. Something about a church, social. Something about a dress that needs hemming. Something about the price of flour going up again. The air smells of dust and motor oil, and the faint sweetness of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. You walk north along the avenue, taking it all in. Here's Williams Confectionery, owned by John and Lula Williams, who built their candy and ice cream shop into one of the most successful businesses in the district. The display window shows rows of chocolates, peppermint sticks, and glass jars of penny candy that make children press their faces against the glass. Next door is a dress shop with mannequins in the window, wearing the latest fashions, hems rising scandalously high by traditional standards, but perfectly in line with what the magazines are showing. A barbershop with 4 chairs, all of them occupied, the conversation inside loud enough to hear from the street. Something about baseball, something about politics, something about a man who owes another man money and won't pay up. What strikes you is how much commerce happens within these few blocks. White Tulsa won't serve black customers, won't let them try on clothes, or eat at lunch counters or stay in hotels. So Greenwood serves itself. Every dollar spent here circulates 6 times before leaving the community, passing from hand to hand like a living thing. You buy groceries from Mr. Simon's store. Mr. Simon pays his supplier, another black businessman. That man pays his employees, who spend their wages at the barber shop, the dress shop, the restaurant on the corner. The money keeps moving, keeps working, keeps building. It's economic self-sufficiency born from exclusion, and it works better than anyone could have predicted. The Dreamland Theatre sits at the heart of the district, a 700-seat movie palace that shows the latest films and hosts live performances on weekends. The marquee advertises something starring Douglas Fairbanks, but you're more interested in the fact that you can walk right up to the ticket window and buy a seat without being told to go around back, without being directed to a cramped balcony, without being made to feel like your money is somehow dirtier than anyone else's. Inside, the seats are upholstered in red velvet, worn soft from years of use. The ceiling is painted with stars, and on Saturday nights, a live band plays before the picture starts. For a few hours, you can sit in the dark and watch stories unfold on a screen, and forget that 30 blocks away, the world has different rules. But the Dreamland isn't the only theatre. The Dixie Theatre operates just down the street, offering competition and choice, because even entertainment here follows the laws of commerce. If one theatre's prices climb too high or its programming grows stale, there's another option. This kind of competition, healthy and productive, exists throughout Greenwood. 2 newspapers, multiple grocers, barbershops on every other block. The market works here because the market is allowed to work, because black customers have somewhere to take their business if they're not satisfied. It's capitalism functioning as advertised, which makes it remarkable only because it's so often denied to people who look like you. The Williams building stands 3 stories tall, one of the most impressive structures in the district. On the ground floor, there's a grocery store and a confectionery. Upstairs, there are professional offices and apartments. The building has its own electricity, supplied by a generator that John Williams installed himself. At night, the lights glow warm against the darkness, a beacon visible for blocks. People call it a symbol, and they're right, but it's also just a building that someone dreamed up and then made real through work and will and the stubborn belief that better was possible. You find work at a print shop on Greenwood Avenue, setting type for one of the local newspapers. The work is precise and tedious, arranging tiny metal letters in wooden frames to spell out the stories that will fill tomorrow's pages. The shop smells of ink and paper and machine oil, and by the end of each day your fingers are stained black and your back aches from bending over the type cases. But the pay is fair, $2 a day, and the owner, a man named Mr. Smitherman, treats his employees like human beings. He asks about your family, remembers your name, pays you on time and in full. These things shouldn't feel remarkable, but in 1921 America, they are. The newspaper you're printing isn't just any paper. It's the Tulsa Star, one of 2 black newspapers serving the Greenwood community. Mr. Smitherman founded it himself, and he uses its pages to advocate for civil rights, to report on injustices, to celebrate the achievements of black Tulsans that white papers won't cover. The paper costs 5 cents, and people read it like scripture, passing copies from hand to hand, discussing articles over dinner tables and in barbershop chairs. Information here isn't just entertainment, it's survival. It's knowing what's happening in the world, what threats are gathering, what opportunities might be coming. Mr. Smitherman believes the pen is mightier than the sword, and he wields his with precision and purpose. The other newspaper, the Oklahoma Sun, offers a different voice, and the 2 publications sometimes clash in their editorials, debating strategies for advancement, arguing over which politicians deserve support. disagreeing about tactics while agreeing on goals. This too is a sign of health. A community that can sustain two newspapers, two perspectives, two visions of the future is a community with depth. The readers benefit from the competition, getting more coverage, more analysis, more information than either paper alone could provide. You set the type for both sometimes, when one shop is overloaded and needs extra hands, and you notice how the stories differ even when they cover the same events. Truth, you learn, has many angles. On Sundays, Greenwood transforms. The business district goes quiet as shops close and families dress in their finest for church. Mount Zion Baptist Church rises at the corner of Eastern Street, its brick facade and stained glass windows a testament to what the congregation built together, dollar by dollar, brick by brick. The sanctuary seats 1,000 people, and on Sunday mornings it fills to capacity. The choir's voices lift toward the rafters, harmony so rich they seem to vibrate in your chest. The preacher speaks of Moses and Pharaoh, of deliverance and promised lands, and everyone in the pews knows he's not just talking about ancient history. He's talking about here. He's talking about now. But Mount Zion isn't the only congregation. Vernon AME Church draws its own crowd, as does the First Baptist Church, and half a dozen smaller congregations scattered throughout the district. The churches serve functions beyond the spiritual. They're meeting halls and community centres, places where mutual aid societies gather and young people caught under watchful eyes. The preachers know everyone's business, which means they know who needs help, who's struggling, who might benefit from a quiet word with a potential employer. The offering plates that pass through the pews fund more than operations. They fund scholarships and emergency assistance and community improvements that benefit believers and non-believers alike. After services, families gather for Sunday dinner. Long tables laden with fried chicken and collard greens, macaroni and cheese and sweet potato pie. The food is abundant, a celebration of making it through another week, a defiance of the scarcity that defines so many black lives elsewhere. Children run through yards while adults sit on porches, fanning themselves in the spring heat, catching up on gossip and news. The laughter carries on the warm air, mixing with the smell of cooking and the distant sound of someone practicing piano scales. This is community. Not the romanticized version you read about in books, but the real thing, messy and complicated and alive. The homes in Greenwood range from modest shotgun houses to substantial two-story residences with manicured lawns. Some families have been here for decades, arriving during the land runs of the late 1800s or following the expansion of the oil industry in the early 1900s. Others, like you, are newcomers, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of something better. The houses might not look like much compared to the mansions of White Tulsa, but they're owned, not rented. That distinction matters. When you own the roof over your head, nobody can put you out on a whim. Nobody can raise your rent to force you somewhere else. You plant roots in soil that belongs to you. The prosperity isn't evenly distributed, of course. Some families live comfortable lives with automobiles and fine furniture and vacations to Kansas City. Others scrape by, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table and children in school. There are people in Greenwood who've never known anything but struggle, even here in this place of relative abundance. But the difference is that here, struggle leads somewhere. Here, a man who starts with nothing can build something. Here, a woman who works hard can open her own shop, hire her own employees, pass something down to her children. The ladder exists, and its rungs are within reach. You settle into a rhythm as the weeks pass. Work at the print shop Monday through Saturday. Church on Sundays. Dinner at Mrs. Jackson's table, where the conversation ranges from politics to recipes to speculation about who's courting whom. Some evenings you walk down to one of the jazz clubs on Admiral Street, where the music spills out the windows and couples dance in the warm night air. The bands play until well past midnight, horns and drums and pianos weaving together into something that makes your feet move without permission. You're not a dancer, never have been, but here in the darkness of the club, pressed close among strangers who feel like family, it doesn't matter. The music doesn't judge. The jazz clubs attract musicians from across the region, players who've heard about Greenwood's scene and want to be part of it. Some nights you recognize songs from the phonograph records that play in shops during the day. Other nights, the music is entirely improvised, musicians responding to each other in real time, building something that's never existed before and will never exist again. The audience participates too, calling out encouragement, clapping on the offbeats, creating an atmosphere that feels electric and sacred simultaneously. This is black art for black audiences, performed in black-owned spaces, and the freedom of it shows in every note. The Stratford Hotel becomes a landmark in your mental map of the district. It's where important visitors stay when they come to Greenwood, where businessmen hold meetings and organizations host events. The lobby has marble floors and velvet chairs, and a sense of grandeur that seems almost impossible given where you are. But that's the thing about Greenwood. It refuses to accept the limitations others try to impose. If white hotels won't accommodate black guests, fine. Build your own hotel, make it finer than theirs, fill it with people who have money to spend and dignity to spare. Let them see what's possible when talent isn't wasted and ambition isn't crushed. The hotel's dining room serves meals that rival anything in White Tulsa, prepared by cooks who learned their craft in the finest kitchens and brought that knowledge here. Traveling businessmen, entertainers passing through, dignitaries visiting from other cities, they all find their way to the Stratford's tables. The conversations over those meals shape policy and commerce, forge alliances and settle disputes. What looks like a simple hotel is actually a hub, a center of gravity around which much of Greenwood's business revolves. Dr. A.C. Jackson lives on a quiet street in the northern part of the district. He's considered one of the finest surgeons in the region, black or white, and patients come from across Oklahoma to seek his care. The Mayo brothers themselves, those famous physicians from Minnesota, have praised his skill. In a just world, Dr. Jackson would practice at the finest hospitals, train the next generation of surgeons, receive the recognition his talents deserve. In 1921 America, he operates out of a hospital in the Black District because the white hospitals won't grant him privileges. It's their loss, truly, but it's also Greenwood's gain. When you need surgery, you want Dr. Jackson's hands holding the scalpel. Everyone knows this. Everyone benefits. The medical community in Greenwood extends beyond Dr. Jackson. Dentists maintain offices along the avenue, filling cavities and pulling teeth for patients who would otherwise go without care. Pharmacists compound prescriptions in shops that smell of chemicals and herbs. Midwives deliver babies in homes throughout the district. Their knowledge passed down through generations and supplemented by whatever formal training they could access. The system isn't perfect. Resources are limited. Equipment is often outdated. And serious cases sometimes require transport to facilities in Kansas City or beyond. But the system exists, which is more than many black communities can claim. The school year is winding down, and the children of Greenwood prepare for summer, with the same mixture of excitement and relief children everywhere feel. Booker T. Washington High School stands as the district's pride, a substantial brick building where black teachers educate black students in subjects ranging from literature to mathematics to vocational skills. The teachers are college educated, many of them graduates of Fisk or Howard or Tuskegee, and they bring to their classrooms a determination that borders on ferocity. These children will learn. These children will succeed. These children will become doctors and lawyers and business owners, will break barriers and build empires, will prove through their very existence that everything white America believes about black capacity is a lie. The education extends beyond the classroom. Every interaction in Greenwood teaches something. At the grocery store, you learn about fair pricing and customer service. At the barbershop, you absorb discussions of politics and philosophy that would rival any university salon. In church, you study history wrapped in theology, messages of hope encoded in scripture. The adults here carry themselves with a certain bearing, a dignity that cannot be legislated away. They pass it down to the children through example, through expectation, through the simple act of treating young people as full human beings worthy of respect. May in Oklahoma is warm, edging toward hot, and the evenings bring a heaviness to the air that makes you move slower, think slower, breathe slower. You sit on the porch of Mrs. Jackson's boarding house, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk, and you think about how different this is from where you came from. Not better in every way. The work is hard, the money never quite enough, the shadow of Jim Crow never entirely gone. White Tulsa exists just across those railroad tracks, and its rules apply the moment you cross that invisible line. You have to step off the sidewalk when a white person approaches. You can't try on clothes in department stores. You can't eat at lunch counters or drink from certain fountains or forget, even for a moment, that this prosperity you found exists at the sufferance of people who would prefer you didn't exist at all. But here, on this side of the tracks, you can breathe. You can walk into a restaurant and sit down at any table. You can look a shopkeeper in the eye and be treated like a customer, not a problem. You can dream about the future without the dream curdling into despair. The boundaries still exist, rigid and dangerous, but within them, something beautiful has grown. 35 blocks of possibility, where black dollars support black businesses, support black families, support black dreams. It's not perfect. It's not paradise, but it's yours. The professionals of Greenwood gather sometimes at the home of O.W. Gurley, one of the founders and principal landowners of the district. He arrived in Indian Territory in 1906, purchased 40 acres, and began selling lots to black settlers who wanted to build something of their own. The community grew from that seed, lot by lot, house by house, store by store, until what exists now spreads across more than 36 blocks. At these gatherings, lawyers discuss cases over glasses of lemonade. Doctors share knowledge about new treatments. Businessmen strategize about expansion, about investment, about how to protect what they've built. The conversation is sophisticated, the people accomplished, the atmosphere one of careful optimism. They know what surrounds them. They know the dangers, but they choose to focus on building rather than burning, with fear. Gurley himself operates a rooming house and grocery store, but his real business is land. He owns more property in Greenwood than almost anyone else, and he's used that position to shape the district's development. When a new family arrives looking to settle, Gurley often helps them find a lot, sometimes extending credit to those who can't afford the full purchase price. He's not purely altruistic. The more families that settle, the more his remaining land increases in value. But the effect is the same. More black families own property. More black families build wealth. More black families have stakes in Greenwood's success. The women of Greenwood run much of what makes the district function, even when their names don't appear on the signs. They manage households and raise children and work jobs and maintain the social networks that hold everything together. At the beauty parlors scattered throughout the district, they gather to have their hair pressed and styled, to exchange information and gossip, to strengthen the bonds that make a community more than just a collection of individuals. These aren't frivolous places. They're headquarters, intelligence operations disguised as grooming appointments. A woman sits in the chair, heat from the pressing comb warm against her scalp, and learns which businesses are hiring, which landlords are fair, which white folks can be trusted, and which absolutely cannot. Mabel Little runs one of the most popular beauty shops in the district, a woman who built her business from nothing and now employs half a dozen stylists. She knows everyone's secrets, which means she knows how to keep them. The trust placed in her is enormous, and she honors it absolutely. Her shop becomes a refuge for women who need to talk, to vent, to process the indignities of life under Jim Crow in a space where they won't be judged. The conversations that happen in those chairs probably do more for community mental health than any formal service could provide. The rhythm of commerce pulses through every day. At the produce stands, farmers from the surrounding areas sell vegetables fresh from the soil, tomatoes and okra, and ears of corn still warm from the field. At the meat markets, butchers carve roasts and grind sausage, their aprons stained red by day's end. At the drugstores, pharmacists fill prescriptions and sell patent medicines and penny candy to children who pool their coins for shared treats. The Iceman comes through in his horse-drawn wagon, blocks of frozen water dripping onto the dusty street, and housewives call out their orders from front porches. £25 for the Johnsons, £50 for the rooming house on the corner. The ice goes into wooden boxes lined with zinc, keeping milk and meat from spoiling in the Oklahoma heat. You notice how information moves through the district, faster than seems possible in an age before television or widespread telephone service. Someone's daughter gets engaged, and by evening half of Greenwood knows. A business changes hands, and within hours people are speculating about what the new owner will do differently. A stranger arrives from out of town, and within a day or two, anyone who matters knows their name, their business, their connections. This network serves purposes beyond gossip. When threats appear, warnings spread just as quickly. When opportunities arise, word reaches those who need to hear it. The community watches over itself because no one else will. Saturday nights bring a different energy to Greenwood. The work week is done. Pay packets are heavy in pockets, and the desire for celebration rises like steam from hot pavement. The dance halls fill with couples moving to jazz and blues, bodies pressed close, laughter and music spilling into the streets. The pool halls draw crowds of young men with money to wager and time to waste. The restaurants serve late dinners to families dressed in their second-best clothes, saving the finest outfits for church tomorrow, but still wanting to look presentable tonight. Even Mrs. Jackson's boarding house buzzes with extra energy. Boarders coming and going, doors opening and closing. The smell of pomade and perfume thick in the hallways. You walk the avenue on one of these Saturday nights, and Greenwood feels like the center of the universe. The streetlights glow warm against the darkness. Music drifts from every direction, overlapping melodies that somehow harmonize into a single sound of celebration. People call greetings across the street, pause to chat on corners, duck into establishments and emerge hours later looking rumpled and happy. A man sells tamales from a cart, the corn husks steaming, the smell of spiced meat making your mouth water. A woman in a red dress laughs at something her companion says, the sound carrying clear and bright. Somewhere, a trumpet climbs a scale and holds a high note that seems to hang suspended in the warm air. The contrast with white, Tulsa grows starker the longer you live here. Across those railroad tracks exists a city that considers itself progressive, modern, a beacon of oil boom prosperity. And yet, that city maintains rigid segregation, refuses to serve black customers, excludes black residents from parks and theaters and public facilities. The laws are explicit, the enforcement is harsh, and somehow, despite this, Greenwood thrives. Or maybe because of it. Forced to create their own institutions, black Tulsans created better ones. Forced to rely on each other, they built networks of mutual support that their white neighbors can't imagine. The oppression meant to crush them instead, forge them into something stronger. Some white Tulsans cross the tracks to spend money in Greenwood, drawn by businesses that offer better service or lower prices than their white counterparts. They come quietly, almost furtively, aware that their presence complicates the neat categories that segregation requires. The blacks, business owners, take their money without comment, because commerce doesn't care about hypocrisy, and every dollar helps. But everyone notices, everyone remembers. The same white customers who spend money in black shops during the day wouldn't lift a finger to help if trouble came. Everyone knows this too. Dr. Jackson's hospital serves patients who have nowhere else to go. The teachers at Booker T. Washington prepare students for futures their parents could only dream of. The lawyers in their offices on Greenwood Avenue fight cases in courtrooms where the deck is stacked against them, and somehow, sometimes win. Every success is a rebuke. Every thriving business says something about capability and worth that polite white society doesn't want to hear. You begin to understand why some white Tulsans look at Greenwood with something other than indifference. That something is fear. June approaches, and the heat intensifies. The days grow long, the sun setting late over the flat Oklahoma landscape. You work your shifts at the print shop, setting type for stories about local events and national news, about businesses opening and couples marrying and babies being born. The newspaper chronicles life in all its ordinary glory, capturing a moment that feels permanent but isn't. Nothing is permanent. You know this. Everyone knows this. But the rhythm of daily life is so steady, so reassuring, that it's easy to forget how fragile everything actually is. At night, you lie in your narrow bed at Mrs. Jackson's and listen to the sounds of Greenwood settling into sleep. The last automobiles rumbling home, the last voices calling goodnights across fence lines, the creak of the house around you, wood expanding and contracting in the cooling air. Through the window, you can see stars bright above the rooftops, the same stars that shine over white Tulsa and over places you've never been and might never see. The sky doesn't know about railroad tracks or segregation or the elaborate hierarchies humans construct to justify cruelty. The sky just is, and under it, for this moment, you just are too. Mrs. Jackson knocks on doors at 6 each morning, her voice firm but not unkind. Breakfast waits on the table, the same eggs and grits and coffee that have started every day since you arrived. The routine has become comfortable, almost beloved. You know which floorboards creak, which chairs wobble, which boarders snore through walls too thin to muffle sound. This place has become home in a way you didn't expect. not because the room is large or the amenities fine, but because here you belong. Here you are known by name and seen as a person and counted as part of something bigger than yourself. The businesses of Greenwood continue their work, oblivious to what's coming, focused on the tasks at hand. The grocers stock shelves, the barbers sharpen razors, the teachers grade papers and plan lessons for the fall term. Still months away. The doctors see patients, the lawyers file motions, the builders hammer and saw, constructing new structures to house the community's expanding dreams. Everything points forward, toward growth, toward more, toward futures bright with possibility. No one knows that the calendar is counting down to something terrible. Why would they? Life has taught them to build in the face of destruction, to hope despite evidence. It's not naivety, it's survival. On the porches of Greenwood, elders rock in chairs, worn smooth by years of use, and tell stories about worse times than these. They remember slavery, some of them. Or they remember parents who lived through it, who carried the scars and the memories forward like heirlooms. They remember Reconstruction and its failures, the promises made and broken, the violence that followed the brief flowering of black political power. They remember arriving in Indian territory with nothing and building something from that nothing through decades of work. What exists now, this prosperity, this community, feels earned in ways that younger generations can't fully understand. The elders watch Greenwood with pride and also with a deeper knowing. They've seen the wheel turn before. The children of Greenwood run through streets that bear their parents' footprints and will someday bear their own. They attend schools their community built. They buy candy from stores their neighbors own. They dream dreams shaped by the evidence of their own eyes, proof that success is possible, that dignity can be claimed even when the larger world denies it. Some of them will become doctors, some will become teachers, some will leave Oklahoma entirely, carrying Greenwood with them to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to New York, spreading its lessons across the country. The future is unwritten, open, waiting to be shaped by hands not yet grown to full strength. You've been in Greenwood for nearly 2 months now. The work has found its rhythm. The community has opened enough to let you inside. You know, the shopkeepers by name, the shortcuts between blocks, the best place to get a haircut, and the best place to avoid if you're not looking for trouble. You've eaten Sunday dinner at tables belonging to 3 different families, welcomed as the new boarder at Mrs. Jackson's, fed and questioned and ultimately accepted into the informal networks of trust that hold everything together. You've contributed something too, modest but real, the labor of your hands and the coins you spend, and the small acts of neighborliness that build connection. The spring of 1921 is nearly over. Summer stretches ahead, promising heat and celebration and the ordinary business of living. No one in Greenwood knows that everything is about to change. No one can see the events already in motion across those railroad tracks, the misunderstanding in an elevator, the headline that will spark the flame, the rage that will descend from the sky. For now, there is only this: these streets, these businesses, these people who built something beautiful in the shadow of oppression. 35 blocks of proof that another world is possible. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed with its clean sheets and soft pillow and walls that hold heat at your command, think about what was lost. Not just the buildings, though those were real. Not just the businesses, though those represented lifetimes of work. Not just the money, though the estimates run into millions of dollars never repaid. What was lost was a model, a demonstration, a living answer to every argument ever made about what Black Americans could or couldn't accomplish if given the chance. Greenwood showed what was possible, and then it burned. But the people who built it, the survivors and their descendants, carried the lessons forward. They rebuilt what they could. They remembered what they couldn't. They made sure the story survived even when the bricks and mortar didn't. The spirits of Greenwood don't haunt. They inspire. Every Black-owned business today draws from a tradition that stretches back through generations, through destruction and rebuilding, through setbacks that would break lesser communities. Every child who grows up knowing this history carries something precious, a proof of concept that says, we did this once, we can do it again. No one can take from us what we know to be true about our own worth. The 35 blocks burned, yes, but the idea of them, the dream of them, the fierce insistence that we deserve to thrive, that flame never went out. You close your eyes in Greenwood, in that narrow bed at Mrs. Jackson's boarding house, and you don't know what's coming. None of them did. But what you do know, what you feel in your bones as you drift toward sleep, is that you are part of something. Something built by hands like yours. Something sustained by belief like yours. Something that matters beyond measure. The jazz still plays faintly in the distance. The smell of cooking still drifts on the night air. The stars still wheel overhead, indifferent and eternal. And Greenwood sleeps, dreaming of tomorrow, which will come regardless. It always does. The question is never whether morning arrives. The question is what we do with the light. Congratulations. You've just made the most dangerous decision of your life. You're running. Not jogging for exercise, not hurrying to catch a train. Running for your freedom, which means running for your life. Because in the American South before the Civil War, those two things were exactly the same. The year is 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act has just passed, which means even if you make it to the North, you're not safe. Federal law now requires citizens everywhere to help capture you. There's a bounty on your head. Slave catchers with dogs and guns are already being hired, and you're standing at the edge of a tobacco field in Virginia, barefoot, wearing clothes that mark you as property, with nothing but the North Star and a prayer. Here's the thing about escaping slavery that the stories don't emphasize enough. You don't know where you're going. You've never seen a map. You can't read. You've never traveled more than a few miles from the plantation where you were born. The North is a concept, a whispered promise, a direction. But you don't know how far it is. You don't know what states you'll cross. You don't know which rivers to ford or which towns to avoid. You know almost nothing, and that nothing might get you killed. The decision to run wasn't made lightly. People planned for months, sometimes years. They stashed food when they could, a handful of cornmeal here, a piece of dried meat there, hidden in hollowed logs or buried in specific spots they'd memorized. They watched the sky, learning which stars pointed north, because compasses weren't exactly available at the general store for enslaved people. They listened to whispered conversations, picking up fragments of information about roads, about conductors, about places where a knock on the right door might mean shelter instead of chains. Some learned coded songs, spirituals that seemed to be about heaven, but were really about escape routes. Follow the Drinking Gourd wasn't just a hymn. It was a map sung, in plain sight of overseers who never understood what they were hearing. And still, most who ran were caught. The numbers are grim. Historians estimate that of the millions held in bondage, only around 100,000 successfully escaped via the Underground Railroad over its decades of operation. That sounds like a lot until you realize it represents a fraction of a fraction. For every person who made it to freedom, dozens were dragged back, beaten, sold further south, where escape became nearly impossible, or killed as an example to others. You're not just running from slavery, you're running into those odds. The first night is the worst, not because of what happens, but because of what doesn't. Nothing feels real yet. Your body is moving through the darkness, pushing through undergrowth, stumbling over roots you can't see, and your mind keeps telling you this isn't happening. You keep expecting to wake up in your cabin, to hear the overseer's bell, to realize it was all a dream. But the scratches on your arms are real. The cold night air filling your lungs is real. The sound of your own heartbeat pounding in your ears, that's painfully real. And somewhere behind you, in the direction you're fleeing from, someone is going to notice you're gone. The question isn't if they'll come looking, it's when, and whether they'll bring dogs. Because they usually bring dogs. You move through the trees, feeling branches whip against your face. Thorns tear at your ankles. The darkness is so complete that you're navigating more by feel than sight. Your hands reach ahead of you, touching bark, pushing aside vines, finding the gaps between obstacles. Every sense you have is straining for information. The smell of water might mean a stream nearby, a chance to drink or to mask your trail. The smell of smoke might mean a farmhouse, which could be salvation or doom depending on who lives there. Let's talk about what you're wearing, which is to say, almost nothing useful. Enslaved people weren't given travel gear. You might have a single layer of rough Osnaburg cloth, a coarse fabric that was cheap to produce and uncomfortable to wear. Your feet are bare or wrapped in scraps of leather that barely qualify as shoes. The soles are thin enough that every rock and root bites into your flesh. If it's winter, you're in serious trouble. If it's summer, the mosquitoes and humidity will eat you alive in different ways. You have no coat, no hat, no gloves. Every piece of clothing you own screams that you're a runaway. The fabric, the cut, the patches, all of it marks you as enslaved to anyone who looks closely. And people will look closely because in the South, everyone was taught to watch for runaways. It was civic duty. It was potential profit. A captured fugitive meant a reward, and rewards motivated even people who claimed to oppose slavery. Your appearance is a liability you cannot change, at least not until you reach a safe house where someone might provide you with different clothes. Until then, you're moving through hostile territory, wearing a uniform that identifies you as prey. Your first obstacle isn't the distance or the cold or the dogs. It's the landscape itself. The South was designed to keep you trapped. Plantations were deliberately isolated, surrounded by miles of wilderness, swamps and rivers with few crossings. Roads were watched, bridges were patrolled. The geography was your prison before the chains ever were. If you're escaping from the deep South, from Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi, you're facing hundreds of miles of hostile terrain before you reach anywhere remotely safe. The Appalachian Mountains loom in the distance, and while they offered cover, they also offered cliffs, freezing temperatures, and the very real possibility of getting hopelessly lost. The trails through those mountains were treacherous even for people who knew them well. For someone who'd never left a plantation, they were deadly mazes. Some runaways, headed for Florida, hoping to find refuge with Seminole communities who had their own reasons to resist white authority. Others aimed for Mexico, which had abolished slavery and offered genuine freedom. But most pointed themselves north, toward states that were nominally free, toward Canada, toward a border that seemed impossibly far away. The distances involved are staggering when you think about them. From the deep south to Canada could be over 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles on foot, at night, through territory that wanted you dead or returned to chains. Now imagine the sounds of that first night. Every snapped twig makes you freeze. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be a patrol, a dog, a snake, or just a rabbit that nearly gave you a heart attack. Owls call overhead, their hoots echoing through the trees, and you don't know if that's a good sign or bad. You don't know what's edible and what's poisonous. You don't know which water is safe to drink. You're operating on terror and hope in roughly equal measures, and both are exhausting fuels. The psychological weight of what you're doing settles in slowly. You've left behind everyone you know, family members, friends, the only community you've ever had. Some of them might have helped you plan this. Some of them might not know you're gone yet. And some of them you'll never see again, no matter what happens. The grief runs parallel to the fear, and you can't afford to feel either one too deeply, because feeling means stopping, and stopping means dying. You might have left behind children, a spouse, parents who are too old to make the journey themselves. You carry their faces in your mind like weights that make every step harder. But you also carry their hopes. Some of them wanted you to go precisely because they couldn't. By dawn, you need to hide. Traveling by day is suicide. Too many eyes, too many patrols, too many ordinary people who turn you in for the reward, or simply because the law told them to. So, you find a thicket, a hollow log, a depression in the ground covered by fallen branches. You curl into the smallest shape you can manage and try not to breathe too loudly. The hiding spots themselves were often horrific. Runaways spent days curled in cramped spaces barely large enough to contain a human body. They lay in swamps with only their noses above water. They pressed themselves into root cellars among rotting vegetables. They endured any discomfort because discovery meant something worse. Sleep doesn't come easy when every sound is a threat, when you're cold and hungry and terrified, when the ground is damp and insects are exploring your body like it's their new home. But eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body shuts down whether you want it to or not. And somewhere in those fitful hours of half sleep, you dream of freedom, or you dream of chains. Sometimes both at once. Let's talk about hunger, because it's going to become your constant companion. You couldn't bring much food. There wasn't much to bring. And what you did manage to hide, maybe some cornbread, maybe a few strips of dried pork, that's gone within the first few days. Now you're foraging, and you don't know what you're doing. Berries that look edible might be poisonous. Roots that seem safe might make you violently ill. If you're lucky, you find streams with crawfish or fish you can catch with your hands. If you're not lucky, you're eating leaves and bark, and whatever you can find that won't kill you immediately. Some runaways ate raw corn stolen from fields, risking discovery for a handful of calories. Others dug up wild onions and roots they half recognized from plantation gardens. The taste didn't matter. Only the fuel mattered. Starvation doesn't happen fast. It happens slow. Your body starts consuming itself. Your muscles weaken. Your mind grows foggy at exactly the moments you need it sharpest. After a week of running on almost nothing, you're a shadow of whoever you were before, and the journey might be just beginning. Your body is failing you at the very moment when you need it most, and there's nothing you can do except keep moving and hope you find food before the weakness overtakes you completely. Water is almost as complicated. Rivers and streams offer hydration, but also dangers. The water might carry diseases that will lay you low days later, when you're too far from help and too weak to continue. Crossing rivers means getting wet, and wet in cold weather means hypothermia. Your body can't maintain its temperature when soaked, and once that core temperature drops, confusion sets in. You make bad decisions. You stop shivering, which sounds like improvement, but is actually your body giving up. But you can't avoid water. You need it to survive. And sometimes you need it to throw off the dogs. Wading through streams and swamps can confuse the scent trail, buying you precious hours before the hounds pick it up again. Some runaways spent days in swamps, chest deep in murky water, waiting for pursuit to pass. They shared those waters with alligators, water moccasins, and clouds of mosquitoes so thick you could choke on them. The Great Dismal Swamp on the Virginia-North Carolina border became a refuge for entire communities of escaped people, living for years in conditions that would break most modern humans in days. They built settlements in that swamp, established lives, raised families, all while surrounded by danger from both nature and the slave catchers who feared to follow them in. They survived because the alternative was worse. They survived because freedom was worth any price. And then there were the dogs. Bloodhounds bred and trained specifically to hunt human beings. The sound of their baying in the distance is something that entered the nightmares of every person who ever ran. These weren't pets. They were weapons, four-legged instruments of terror that could track a scent trail for miles, through water, through undergrowth, through every obstacle you tried to put between yourself and capture. Slave owners invested heavily in these animals, breeding them for persistence, training them from puppies to follow human scent above all others. The dogs were often more valuable than the enslaved people they hunted, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on anyone. When you heard those dogs getting closer, you had options, none of them good. You could try to find water deep enough to break your trail. You could climb a tree and pray they passed beneath you. You could keep running and hope you were faster than the men behind the dogs. Or you could prepare to fight, knowing that fighting usually meant dying. The dogs weren't trained to kill necessarily. They were trained to hold you until their owners arrived. But being held by dogs meant being bitten, clawed, terrified into submission. The physical scars were nothing compared to what it did to your spirit. Some people who were caught by dogs and returned to slavery never recovered mentally. The trauma lived in their bodies forever. And if the dogs caught you, the men weren't far behind. And the men had whips, chains, and the legal authority to do whatever they wanted to you. Here's a detail that often gets lost in the tellings. The Underground Railroad wasn't a railroad, and it wasn't underground. It was a loose network of safe houses, sympathetic individuals, and secret routes. The railroad terminology, conductors, stations, passengers, all of that was code designed to confuse anyone who might be listening. But it wasn't organized like a modern network. There was no central command, no guaranteed next stop, no ticket you could purchase that ensured arrival. Each conductor knew only their small piece of the route. If one link broke, the whole chain could collapse for everyone depending on it. The secrecy that protected the network also made it fragile. A single arrest could unravel years of careful organization. You might arrive at a safe house only to find the family had moved or been arrested or simply lost their nerve. Then you were back in the wilderness with no plan and no help, and the dog still howling somewhere behind you. The system worked because it was decentralized, but that same quality meant you could never fully rely on it. You were always ultimately alone with your own wits and luck. The conductors themselves were remarkable people, and not just for the obvious reasons. Harriet Tubman, the most famous of them, made 19 trips back into slave territory to lead people north, carrying a pistol and a fierce determination that bordered on the supernatural. She reportedly never lost a passenger, a record almost impossible to believe given the dangers involved. Tubman suffered from seizures caused by a head injury she'd received as a child, hit by a metal weight thrown by an overseer. Those seizures could strike at any moment, leaving her temporarily incapacitated. She made those 19 trips anyway. She carried a gun not just for defense against slave catchers, but reportedly to convince any passenger who wanted to turn back that turning back wasn't an option. A returning runaway could be tortured into revealing the route, endangering everyone. Better to die free than to endanger the whole network. But Tubman was one of many. White abolitionists risked imprisonment and social ruin to hide runaways in their homes. Free black communities in northern cities organized protection networks. Quakers violated their pacifist principles to arm and defend escaped people. Native American communities offered sanctuary when they could. Each person who helped was breaking federal law after 1850, risking fines, prison, and worse. They did it anyway, because some things matter more than safety. But trusting strangers was a gamble every single time. You're approaching a house you've been told is safe. You see a lantern in the window, the signal you were promised. But what if it's a trap? What if the conductor was captured and forced to reveal the signal? What if someone informed and the slave catchers are waiting inside? There were documented cases of exactly this happening. Slave catchers learned the signals, set traps, posed as conductors to catch runaways at their most vulnerable moment. You stand in the darkness, watching that light, trying to decide whether it means freedom or chains. Your whole body is screaming at you to run, to trust no one, to stay hidden in the wilderness, where at least you know the dangers. But the wilderness is killing you slowly. You haven't eaten properly in days. Winter is coming. You need help, so you approach the door, every step feeling like a walk toward your own execution. You knock and you wait, and in that moment you understand prayer more deeply than any sermon ever taught you. Let's say the house is safe. Let's say you're welcomed inside by people who risk everything to help you. What then? You can't rest long. A few hours, maybe a night if you're lucky. They give you food, real food, warm food, and your stomach cramps because it's forgotten how to process anything besides desperation. The first real meal after days of starvation is almost painful. Your shrunken stomach rebels against abundance. You eat slowly, carefully, knowing that gorging yourself will only make you sick. They give you clothes that don't mark you as a runaway. Maybe the rough outfit of a free laborer, something that might buy you a few seconds of doubt if someone stops you. They tell you about the next station, the next conductor, the signals to look for. They warn you about which roads to avoid, which towns have aggressive patrols, where the safe crossings are. You memorize everything because you can't write it down. If you're captured with a written route, everyone along that route is exposed. The information stays in your head, and your head stays attached to your body only as long as you're smart and lucky. The cold. Let's return to the cold because it deserves more attention. Many escapes happened in winter, counterintuitive as that sounds. The frozen ground was easier to travel than mud. Rivers could sometimes be crossed on ice, and the long nights gave more hours of darkness to move without being seen. Winter also meant fewer people outdoors, fewer eyes watching roads and fields. But winter was also a killer with no malice, just physics. Your body loses heat faster than you can generate it. Your fingers and toes go numb, then painful, then numb again, in a way that means damage. Frostbite took extremities from runaways who had no shelter, no proper clothing, no fire that might give away their position. You couldn't build a fire most nights. The light and smoke would be visible for miles, a beacon announcing your location to anyone hunting you. So you shivered through the darkness, curled tight to conserve warmth, counting the hours until dawn brought slightly warmer temperatures. Some people froze to death within sight of safe houses, too weak to cover those final miles. Others survived the cold, but lost pieces of themselves to it. Fingers and toes that turned black and fell away, permanent reminders of what they'd paid for freedom. The irony of surviving the journey, only to lose parts of your body, wasn't lost on anyone. Consider crossing the Ohio River, one of the most famous boundaries between slave and nominally free territory. In winter, the ice could be thick enough to walk on, but you never knew for certain. Every step might be your last if the ice cracked beneath you. You test the ice ahead of you, listening for that terrible sound of fracturing, ready to throw yourself backward if the surface gave way. The water below was cold enough to kill in minutes. If you fell through, there was no rescue. No one was coming to save you. You either pulled yourself out immediately or you died. Some people made it across and collapsed on the far bank, too frozen to move, found by conductors who carried them to warmth or found by slave catchers who dragged them back to bondage. In warmer months, you needed a boat, which meant finding someone willing to row you across or stealing a vessel and hoping you could navigate currents you didn't understand. The river was watched, patrolled, lined with eyes that knew what to look for. Crossing it was a moment of maximum vulnerability. Out in the open water, no place to hide. Everything depending on speed and darkness and luck. And here's the cruel twist that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 delivered. Even if you made it north, you weren't free. Federal marshals could arrest you anywhere in the country. Citizens were legally required to assist in your capture, facing fines if they refused. The penalties for helping you had increased dramatically. Suddenly the northern states, which had seemed like promised land, became just another layer of danger. You couldn't stop running until you reached Canada, and Canada was hundreds of miles further still. Some people who thought they'd made it were captured years later, living in northern cities, working jobs, building lives. They'd married, had children, established themselves in communities. All of it could be torn away in an instant by someone who recognized you or someone who was paid to hunt you. Slave catchers operated openly in northern cities, scanning black communities for faces that matched reward posters. The paranoia didn't end at the Mason-Dixon line. It followed you forever, until you crossed that final border into Canada and stood on soil where American law couldn't reach you. Now imagine you've been running for weeks. You've crossed rivers. You've hidden in barns and cellars and haystacks. You've eaten things you'd rather not name and walked until your feet bled and then walked more. Your feet are a ruin of blisters and open wounds. Every step is agony, but you keep stepping. You've watched over your shoulder so constantly that you've forgotten what it feels like to look forward without fear. You're close now, maybe a day from the border, maybe hours. And that's when the worst thought arrives. What if none of it was worth it? What if you're captured at the final step? What if everything you've suffered amounts to nothing but a story about a runaway who almost made it? That psychological torment was as brutal as anything physical. The hope was killing you as surely as the pursuit, because hope meant you had something to lose, and having something to lose meant every moment was weighted with potential devastation. You're so close that you can almost feel freedom, and that almost is the cruelest feeling of all. The emotional toll extended beyond the individual runner. Those left behind didn't know what happened to you. They might never know. Did you make it? Did you die in some swamp? Are you living free somewhere, unable to send word because any letter could be traced? The silence was a kind of ongoing death for everyone who loved you. Mothers who sent. Children north spent the rest of their lives wondering. Children who left parents behind carried that weight forever. And if you did make it, if you reached Canada and built a new life, that silence cut both ways. You couldn't go back. You couldn't safely contact anyone. The people who helped you escape might be dead, arrested, or still working to help others. You were free, but freedom came with a particular loneliness that nothing quite healed. Some people who made it to Canada spent years trying to find ways to buy family members out of bondage, sending money south through intermediaries, hoping against hope that freedom could be purchased for the people they'd left behind. Let's talk about the Underground Railroad's unsung participants. Not just the famous conductors, but the ordinary people who made it work. The farmers who left barn doors unlocked and asked no questions. The merchants who lost customers because they were rumored to be abolitionists but kept helping anyway. The free black communities who had the most to lose, targeted as they were by laws designed to criminalize their very existence, but who organized anyway because they knew what slavery meant and couldn't turn away from those fleeing it. These communities established vigilance committees to protect runaways and watch for slave catchers. They raised funds to support escaped people in their first months of freedom. They risked their own freedom every single day. The risk these people took wasn't dramatic. It was daily, grinding, constant. Every morning they woke up wondering if this was the day they'd be discovered. Every knock on the door could be federal marshals. Every stranger in town could be a spy. And they kept going anyway. Think about the children who ran. Because children escaped too. Sometimes with parents, sometimes alone. Imagine being 12 years old and walking through the wilderness at night, hungry and terrified, with no adult to guide you. Imagine being a mother running with an infant, knowing that if the baby cried at the wrong moment, you'd both be caught. There are documented cases of mothers using laudanum to quiet infants, risking their children's health because the alternative was capture. Some parents made the heartbreaking choice to send children ahead alone, hoping the child had a better chance without an adult slowing them down. Some parents gave children away to conductors, trusting strangers completely because the alternative was raising a child in bondage. These decisions haunted people for the rest of their lives, whether the outcomes were good or bad. The calculus of slavery forced impossible choices on people who only wanted to protect their families. Every choice was wrong. Every choice was also the best option available. And now, consider the endurance required. Not just physical endurance, though, that was enormous. The psychological endurance to keep moving when every instinct screamed, stop. The spiritual endurance to maintain hope when hope seemed irrational. The emotional endurance to suppress grief, fear, and rage into something you could carry without it breaking you. Runaways developed a kind of mental armor that allowed them to keep functioning in impossible circumstances. They compartmentalized trauma in real time, pushing down emotions that would have paralyzed them if felt fully. This was a survival adaptation, and it left marks that didn't show on the skin. People who made it to freedom sometimes struggled for years afterward, the delayed weight of everything they'd suppressed finally demanding to be felt. You wouldn't last a day. That's not an insult. It's recognition of how extraordinary the people who did last were. They came from a world designed to crush their humanity, and they refused to be crushed. They made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. They trusted strangers when trust was insane. They kept walking when walking was torture. They believed in freedom before they'd ever experienced it, held onto an idea so tightly that it pulled them across hundreds of miles of danger. They did this without maps, without supplies, without any guarantee of success. They did this knowing that most who tried would fail. They did this anyway. When you finally do cross that border, if you cross it, the moment isn't what you expected. There's no ceremony, no trumpets, just another step forward onto ground that looks exactly like the ground behind you. Trees look the same, snow looks the same. The cold biting at your face feels identical on both sides of an invisible line. But something shifts in your chest. Something you didn't know was clenched finally releases. You're still hungry. You're still cold. You're still exhausted and damaged and carrying wounds that will never fully heal. But you're free. The word means something different now than it did before you ran. It means possibility. It means tomorrow isn't already written by someone who owns you. It means you belong to yourself, finally, irrevocably, no matter what happens next. You might stand there for a long moment, just feeling the reality of it. You're in Canada. You're free. No one can drag you back. The law that defined you as property has no power here. The Underground Railroad wasn't a single story. It was thousands of stories, each one unique, each one a testament to courage that most of us will never have to find in ourselves. The conductors who risked everything, the passengers who walked through hell, the ordinary people who left doors open and asked no questions. All of them participated in something that looked impossible and made it possible anyway. They didn't just free individuals. They demonstrated something about human beings that we still need to remember. They proved that systems of oppression, no matter how powerful they seem, are never as strong as the human will to be free. So tonight, as you lie in your warm bed, in your safe home, in a world where freedom is assumed, rather than earned with blood and terror, you might spare a thought for those who walked before you. They ran through darkness so thick it swallowed everything. They trusted stars and strangers and something inside themselves that refused to accept the unacceptable. They survived conditions that would break you and me, not because they were superhuman, but because they were human in the deepest sense, capable of enduring what seemed unendurable when the cause was worth it. The Underground Railroad isn't just history. It's a reminder that the most ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that some things matter more than safety, more than comfort, more than their own survival. Every safe house was a small rebellion. Every mile walked in darkness was a declaration. Every person who made it to freedom carried proof that the system designed to hold them was weaker than the spirit it tried to crush. That proof mattered not just for them, but for everyone who came after. It mattered for the abolitionist movement that drew strength from every successful escape. It mattered for the nation that would eventually tear itself apart over the question of slavery. It matters still today, as a reminder of what humans are capable of, both the cruelty and the resistance. You wouldn't last a day, but those who did, they changed everything. And their courage echoes still in every fight for freedom, in every refusal to accept injustice, in every step taken into uncertainty, because the alternative is surrender. They ran so that you could rest. They suffered so that their descendants might live without suffering. The least we can do is remember them, not as symbols, but as people, scared and brave and desperately human, walking north beneath the same stars that shine above you tonight. Congratulations, you've just woken up in rural Alabama, 1935. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but you're already awake because the day doesn't wait for black women. Your body aches from yesterday's labor and the day before that, and every day stretching back as far as you can remember. The mattress beneath you is thin cotton ticking stuffed with corn husks that crinkle when you shift. The cabin smells like wood smoke, lard, and the faint mustiness of clothes that never quite dry all the way. There's no running water. There's no electricity. The outhouse is 30 yards away in the dark, and you'll need to make that walk before the sun comes up. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, feet touching rough wooden planks that have been worn smooth in some places and splintered in others. The air is cool, not cold, but enough to make you reach for the shawl draped over the bedpost. Your children are still sleeping, 3 of them curled together on the other bed like puppies seeking warmth. Your husband left for the fields an hour ago. You can hear the distant sound of other men heading out, their voices low murmurs in the pre-dawn grey. Your day started the moment your eyes opened. Theirs started even earlier. Here's the thing about being a black woman in Jim Crow America. You weren't just living under segregation. You were living under layers of it. The law said you couldn't use white facilities, couldn't vote, couldn't testify against white people in court. But underneath those laws sat something older and uglier, the assumption that your body wasn't yours, your time wasn't yours, and your dignity was a luxury you hadn't earned. White women were fragile flowers to be protected. You were a mule to be worked. That's not metaphor. That's how the system actually functioned. Zora Neale Hurston would write that the black woman was the mule of the world, and she meant it literally. You carried what others refused to carry. You bore what others refused to bear. And you did it without the protection that society extended to almost everyone else. The cabin around you tells its own story. 2 rooms if you're lucky, 1 if you're not. Newspaper pages pasted on the walls for insulation. The headlines from years past now faded and yellowed, talking about events that happened in a world that barely acknowledges your existence. The gaps between the boards letting cold in winter and mosquitoes in summer. You've stuffed rags into the worst of them, but the wind still finds a way. The floor is bare wood that you scrub every Saturday on your hands and knees, keeping it clean enough that you can feel proud, even when you have nothing else to feel proud about. Your grandmother lived in a cabin like this after emancipation. Some things haven't changed as much as they should have. You cross the small room to the stove, a cast iron beast that dominates the corner. The fire from last night has died to embers, so you add kindling, blow gently until flames lick upward, and set the coffee pot on top. Coffee is a luxury, but you've learned to stretch it. Yesterday's grounds mixed with today's, producing something that tastes mostly like hot brown water with the memory of bitterness. But it's warm, and warm is something. You slice fat back, drop it into the skillet, and listen to it sizzle while you mix cornmeal and water for hoe cakes. This is breakfast. This is most meals, actually. Meat when you can get it, cornbread always, vegetables from the garden when they're in season. Hunger isn't a crisis. It's a companion you've learned to negotiate with. The garden out back is yours, one of the few things that truly belongs to you. Collard greens, sweet potatoes, tomatoes in summer, pole beans climbing up sticks you cut yourself from the woods. You know this soil intimately, which patches drain well and which hold water, where the morning sun hits first, how deep to plant each seed. Your grandmother taught your mother taught you, and you're teaching your daughter. This knowledge isn't in any book. It's in your hands, in the calluses on your palms, in the way you can tell by smell alone whether the soil is ready for planting. The garden feeds your family when nothing else does. In lean times, and there are many lean times, it's the difference between hungry and starving. You've developed a whole system for stretching food. Bones get boiled twice, sometimes 3 times, until every trace of marrow has given itself up to the pot. Vegetable scraps become stock. Stale bread becomes bread pudding, or gets crumbled into gravy to stretch it further. Nothing is wasted, because nothing can be wasted. You've learned to make poverty taste like love, seasoning beans with ham hocks until your children don't realize they're eating poor people's food. Other women in the neighborhood share recipes, trade secrets, compete gently over who makes the best cornbread or the smoothest sweet potato pie. In this small arena, you are artists. Your medium is limitation, and your masterpiece is keeping your family fed. By the time the children wake, you've already been working for an hour. You feed them quickly, braid your daughter's hair tight against her scalp because it needs to last the week, and check your son's shoes for holes that might need patching with cardboard. School exists for black children, but only barely. The building is a former church with a leaking roof and books so outdated they still reference presidents who died before your grandmother was born. The white school across town has a gymnasium. Yours has a wood stove and hope. Your children will walk 2 miles to get there, while white children ride buses that drive past without stopping. If your kids are late, they're punished. If they complain about the walk, you remind them that education is the one thing nobody can take away. You say it like you believe it. Some days you do. The hair braiding is its own ritual, passed down through generations. You part your daughter's hair with the end of a rat-tail comb, section by section, your fingers moving with practiced speed. She sits between your knees on a low stool, trying not to squirm even when you pull too tight. You tell her stories while you work, the same stories your mother told you. Stories about clever girls who outsmarted foxes. Stories about ancestors who crossed impossible distances. Stories about a future where she won't have to bow her head to anyone. The braids are practical, yes, meant to last a week without attention, because there's no time for daily styling. But they're also armor. They're also identity. They're also love, woven strand by strand into patterns that connect her to everyone who came before. The schooling gap haunts you. You made it through 6th grade yourself, which was more than most in your generation. But you can see how the system is designed to keep your children in the same place you're stuck. The school year for black children is shorter, scheduled around planting and harvest, so they can work the fields. The teachers are dedicated but stretched impossibly thin, sometimes managing 50 students across 6 grade levels in a single room. Supplies are whatever the white schools threw away last year, chalk worn to nubs, maps with countries that don't exist anymore, arithmetic books with half the pages missing. And yet your children learn. They learn because their teachers refuse to let them fail. Because you drill them on reading and numbers at night by lamplight. Because the whole community understands that education is the long game, the slow escape route that might take generations to work. Miss Johnson, the teacher, is a woman you admire more than almost anyone. She went to a normal school 2 counties over, came back with a certificate and a mission. She makes $23 a month, less than half what white teachers earn, and she spends most of it on supplies for her students. You've seen her patch her own shoes with newspaper while making sure every child has a pencil. She boards with families in rotation because she can't afford her own place, which means she has no privacy, no space of her own, no life outside the classroom. But every morning she stands at that schoolhouse door, immaculate and fierce, ready to pour knowledge into children the world has already written off. Watching her, you allow yourself to imagine your daughter grown, standing at a door like that, changing lives the way Miss Johnson changes them. But you can't linger on the children's schooling because you have your own work waiting. 3 days a week, you walk to the Henderson house on the other side of town. Mrs. Henderson is a white woman who considers herself kind, which mostly means she doesn't yell as much as some employers. You cook her meals, clean her floors, wash her clothes, iron her husband's shirts until the creases could cut paper, and tend to her children with a gentleness she never extends to yours. You call her Mom. She calls you by your first name, or sometimes just girl, even though you're 34 years old with grey threading through your temples. The walk takes 45 minutes each way. There's a bus, but you'd have to sit in the back, and the white driver has a habit of pulling away while black passengers are still climbing on. Easier to walk, safer to walk. At least, your own 2 feet don't humiliate you. The route to the Henderson house takes you through 2 different worlds. You start in your neighborhood, where people wave from porches and children call out greetings, and the smell of breakfast drifts from every window. Then you cross the railroad tracks, the dividing line that might as well be a border between countries. The houses get bigger, the streets get paved, the lawns get greener because people have time and money to water them. You walk faster here, eyes down, making yourself small. White women clutch their purses tighter when you pass. White men look through you like you're made of glass. You've learned every shortcut, every alley, every path that minimizes contact. Some streets you avoid entirely because there are houses there where bad things have happened to women who look like you. The Henderson kitchen is where you'll spend most of your day. It's clean and bright, nothing like your own. Running water from a tap, an electric refrigerator that hums in the corner, a gas stove with knobs that click satisfyingly when you turn them. You're trusted to cook elaborate meals, but not to eat them. Lunch for you is whatever scraps you can take without being noticed. Cold biscuits and the fatty edges of ham that Mrs. Henderson trims away. You eat standing up quickly in the pantry where no one can see. Sitting at their table isn't just forbidden, it's unthinkable. The furniture in this house has a color line too. The work itself is endless. You wash dishes in water so hot it turns your hands red. Then you wash them again, because Mrs. Henderson found a spot on a glass. You scrub the bathroom on your knees, face close enough to the porcelain to count every speck, using cleaners that make your eyes water and your throat burn. You make beds with hospital corners, dust furniture that was already clean, polished silver that nobody uses. The labor isn't always necessary. Sometimes it's just performance, proof that you're earning your wage, evidence that Mrs. Henderson is running a proper household. You understand this game even if she doesn't. Your labor is part of her identity. Without someone to supervise, what would she do with her days? There's a particular cruelty to intimate knowledge of how the other half lives. You know exactly how soft Mrs. Henderson's sheets are because you wash and iron them. You know exactly how her bathroom smells like lavender and rose because you scrub it daily. You know the taste of the food you prepare because you test it for seasoning. Then watch the family eat while your own stomach growls. You go home at night to your corn husk mattress and your outhouse and your kerosene lamp, carrying in your body the memory of electric lights, and indoor plumbing and a gas stove that lights with the turn of a knob. Some days the contrast feels like violence. Other days you've gone numb to it. You're not sure which is worse. And here's where it gets complicated, because you're not just a worker in this house. You're also invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Mrs. Henderson will discuss her marriage troubles in front of you, like you're part of the wallpaper. She'll complain about her husband's drinking, her mother-in-law's criticism, her worry that she's getting fat. You nod, murmur sympathetically, keep scrubbing the pot in your hands. You know more secrets about this family than any of their white friends do. But if you ever repeated those secrets, if you ever presumed to have an opinion about them, you'd be fired and blacklisted before sundown. Your knowledge is power you can never use, so you file it away and keep working. Some days Mrs. Henderson gives you her old clothes. She presents them like gifts, and you're expected to be grateful. So you are, outwardly at least. The dresses are usually stained or out of fashion, things she'd be embarrassed to donate to her church. You take them home and remake them, taking in seams, letting out hems, transforming cast-offs into something your daughter can wear to Sunday service. There's a particular humiliation in wearing your employer's discards, but there's also a particular triumph in making them beautiful. You learn to sew from your mother, who learned from hers, all the way back to slavery times when black women made clothes for the whole plantation, and then, in stolen moments, made something fine for themselves. The needle in your hand connects you to all of them. The children you care for in this house will never know how much of their raising was done by you. You're the one who heats their bottles. You're the one who walks them through nightmares. You're the one who teaches them to tie their shoes and say please and thank you. When they fall down, they run to you before they run to their mother. When they're scared, your voice is the one that soothes them. You love them in a way, because you can't help it, because children are children regardless of whose children they are. But you also know that one day these same children will grow up and call you by your first name, will expect you to step off the sidewalk, will become the same white people who see you as less than human. That knowledge sits in your chest, like a splinter you can't remove. The danger, though. Let's talk about the danger, because it's always there, humming beneath the surface like electricity in the walls. Mr. Henderson comes home for lunch sometimes. He's a big man, red-faced and loud, and he looks at you in a way that makes your skin crawl. Not every day, not even most days, but enough that you've learned to keep the kitchen island between you, to never be alone in a room with him if you can help it, to make yourself small and uninteresting and invisible. Because if something happened, if he decided to take what he wanted, who would you tell? The police? They'd laugh you out of the station if they didn't arrest you for lying. Your husband? He'd want to kill Mr. Henderson, and then they'd kill him, and your children would have no father. So you manage. You calculate. You develop a sixth sense for when to leave a room and when to stay still and when to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, because laughter is a kind of armor. This isn't paranoia. This is survival math that every black woman in Jim Crow America learned to do. The Tuskegee Institute documented over 4,700 lynchings between 1882 and 1968, and those were just the ones that got recorded. Many victims were black men accused of looking at white women wrong, but black women were lynched too, beaten too, assaulted too. The crime of being black and female was that you were seen as unrapeable. The law didn't recognize it. The courts didn't prosecute it. Your body belonged to anyone who wanted to claim it, and your only protection was luck, strategy, and prayer. You've developed a whole vocabulary of deflection, ways to refuse without refusing, ways to disappear while still standing in plain sight. You know how to make yourself seem older than you are, less attractive, less available. You wear your wedding ring prominently, even though it's just a thin band of brass. You mention your husband in every conversation. You develop a slight limp, a persistent cough, anything that makes you seem less desirable as a target. Other women share these strategies in quiet conversations, comparing notes like soldiers comparing battle tactics. Because that's what it is, a war. And the enemy wears a friendly face and signs your paycheck. So you work through the afternoon with that knowledge sitting in your chest like a stone. You scrub floors on your hands and knees because Mrs. Henderson prefers it that way. Says the mop doesn't get into corners properly. Your knees ache. Your back screams. The lye soap cracks your hands until they bleed in the creases. But you keep working because the alternative is worse. $3 a week, sometimes $4 if Mrs. Henderson is feeling generous or if there's a party to prepare for. That money feeds your children, patches your roof, pays the poll tax that theoretically allows your husband to vote, though he never actually can, because the registrar keeps losing his paperwork. Every dollar is survival, and survival doesn't leave room for pride. By late afternoon, the Henderson children come home from their school, the good school, the one with new textbooks and actual science equipment. They're nice kids mostly. The youngest one, a girl about your daughter's age, sometimes follows you around the kitchen asking questions. What's that spice? Why do you tie your hair up? Can you teach me that song you were humming? You answer patiently because she's a child and doesn't know any better. But there's something that twists in your chest when you think about how different her life will be from your daughter's. She'll go to college. She'll have choices. She'll grow up believing the world is fair, because for her, it mostly will be. The walk home takes longer than the walk there because your legs are tired and the evening air is thick with humidity. You pass through the white part of town first, careful to keep your eyes down, to step off the sidewalk if a white person approaches, to make yourself unthreatening in 100 small ways that have become automatic. A police car rolls past slowly, and you feel your heart rate spike even though you've done nothing wrong. Doing nothing wrong has never been protection enough. You know women who got arrested for sass, for looking uppity, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The jail is not somewhere you want to go. Things happen to black women in that jail that don't get written in any report. Once you cross into the black part of town, your shoulders drop slightly. Here at least you can breathe. The houses are smaller, shabbier, but they're yours. Neighbors wave from porches. Children play in dusty yards. The smell of dinner cooking drifts from open windows, fatback and greens and cornbread. The same meal echoing from house to house because everyone's working with the same limited ingredients. There's a church on the corner, white-painted clapboard with a steeple that leans slightly to the left. On Sundays, you sing there until your voice goes hoarse. And for those few hours, you feel something like whole. But tonight is Wednesday, and there's more work waiting. Your own house needs cleaning. Your children need feeding. The garden needs watering. Your husband comes home with dirt ground into every crease of his skin, exhausted from 12 hours of labor that paid him half what the white farmhands make. You heat water for him to wash, serve him the best portion of whatever you've managed to cook, and listen while he talks about his day. His voice is heavy with frustration he can't show anywhere else. The foreman called him boy. A white worker half his age got promoted over him. He knows things are unfair. He also knows there's nothing to be done about it. Not right now. Not without dying. So he swallows it down, same as you do, and you both keep moving forward because stopping isn't an option. Your marriage isn't the romance novels Mrs. Henderson reads. It's something harder and maybe more real. You and your husband are partners in survival, yoked together by necessity and children, and a love that's been weathered by forces neither of you can control. There are tender moments, his hand finding yours in the dark, his pride when your son brings home good marks from school, the way he still calls you pretty even when you feel worn to nothing. But there's also the weight of what you can't talk about, the fear you both carry, the anger you can't express, the dreams you gave up so long ago you barely remember what they were. Sometimes you look at white couples walking down the street, holding hands without worry, and you wonder what it would feel like to love without the shadow of terror hanging over everything. You worry about what this world is doing to your husband's spirit. He used to laugh more. He used to have plans. When you first married, he talked about saving enough money to buy your own land, maybe start a small business, build something that belonged to your family alone. 10 years later, you're still sharecropping, still owing more at the end of each year than you earned, still trapped in a system designed to keep you trapped. You see how the weight of it bends him. Some nights, he doesn't talk at all, just sits by the stove staring at nothing, his hands hanging loose between his knees. You don't know how to help him. You barely know how to help yourself. So you sit beside him in silence, your shoulder touching his, offering the only thing you have left to offer: presence, witness, the simple promise of not being alone. After dinner, you finally sit down. Your body feels like it's made of stones. Your feet throb, your hands are swollen. But there's mending to do, so you thread a needle by lamplight and start patching your son's pants while your daughter reads aloud from a school book, stumbling over words but trying so hard you could cry. This is the moment you live for, the quiet hour when your family is together and safe, and the white world feels far away. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. But right now, in this small circle of lamplight, you are enough. You have enough. You allow yourself to believe that somehow, someday, things will be different for your children. The medical situation deserves its own attention because it was its own special kind of horror. When you got sick, and you did get sick, because your body was worked past breaking on a regular basis, your options were limited. White hospitals either refused black patients entirely or relegated them to basement wards where care was an afterthought. The black hospital, if your town had one, was underfunded and overcrowded, staffed by dedicated physicians who had too many patients and too few supplies. A serious illness could bankrupt your family. An emergency might simply kill you before help arrived. You remember when your neighbor's boy got his hand caught in a cotton gin. The screaming could be heard 3 fields away. They loaded him in a cart and drove to the white hospital, the closest one, and were turned away at the door. By the time they got to the black clinic 20 miles further, the hand couldn't be saved. He was 12 years old and would spend the rest of his life learning to do everything with one hand because white doctors couldn't be bothered to treat a black child. Stories like this were common. Everyone knew someone who died or been maimed because of delayed care. You learned to treat what you could at home: poultices for infections, willow bark tea for fever, prayers for everything else. The old women in your community carry medical knowledge that has no formal name. They know which roots break fevers and which herbs ease childbirth. They know how to set bones and staunch bleeding and recognize the signs of illnesses they have no ability to treat. This knowledge came over on slave ships and survived because it had to. When doctors wouldn't come and hospitals wouldn't open their doors, this was what stood between your people and death. You've learned some of it yourself. Remedies passed from your grandmother to your mother to you. Your daughter watches you carefully when you prepare medicines, storing the knowledge against a future where she, too, might have no one else to rely on. Childbirth was particularly dangerous. Black maternal mortality rates were astronomical compared to white women's, not because your bodies were weaker, but because the system didn't care if you lived. Midwives delivered most black babies in the rural South, skilled women who'd learned their craft from grandmothers and great-grandmothers going back to slavery times. They did remarkable work with almost nothing. But when complications arose, when bleeding wouldn't stop or babies got stuck, there was often nowhere to turn. You'd hear about women who died in labor because the white hospital wouldn't admit them, or who lost babies because the doctor took too long to come to the black part of town. Every pregnancy was a gamble. Every safe delivery was a small miracle. You've had 3 children and 2 that didn't make it. The first loss happened early, a miscarriage, while you were working in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen. You finished your shift before going home because you couldn't afford to lose the day's wages. The second was a boy who lived 3 days before fever took him. You buried him in the church cemetery in a box your husband made from scrap lumber, and you planted flowers on his grave that bloom every spring. You don't talk about them much, these lost children, but they live in a corner of your heart that never stops aching. Other women understand. Almost everyone has lost someone. You share this grief in glances, in quiet conversations after church, in the way you hold other people's babies a little tighter because you know how easily they can be taken. And if you needed to prevent pregnancy, well, good luck with that. Contraception existed but wasn't easily accessible, especially for poor black women in the rural South. You might hear about diaphragms or douches from other women, whispered information passed along like contraband. Some women relied on extended breastfeeding to space their children. Others used herbal remedies of uncertain effectiveness. The rhythm method required counting days on a calendar, which required having a calendar and enough control over your own body to say no on the risky days, neither of which was guaranteed. So families grew larger than resources could support, and women wore their bodies out with pregnancy after pregnancy, aged before their time by the sheer physical toll of reproduction. Let's talk about the violence more directly, because it shaped everything. The threat wasn't abstract. It was as real as the ground under your feet. Black women in Jim Crow America lived with the knowledge that their bodies could be violated at any moment and there would be no justice. White men who assaulted black women faced virtually no legal consequences. Courts routinely dismissed cases or found defendants not guilty regardless of evidence. The assumption built into the legal system was that black women were promiscuous by nature, couldn't really be raped because you were always willing, or at least never unwilling in a way that mattered. This wasn't just individual cruelty, it was systematized impunity. And the violence wasn't only sexual. Black women were beaten, whipped, and murdered for infractions real and imagined. Speaking disrespectfully to a white person could get you killed. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could get you killed. Existing while black and female in a space where a white person felt you didn't belong could get you killed. The famous case of Mary Turner in 1918 illustrated the depths of this brutality. 8 months pregnant, she spoke out against the lynching of her husband and was herself lynched, her baby cut from her body and stomped to death by the mob. This wasn't ancient history. This was within living memory. Women who survived into the 1960s and 1970s remembered these horrors directly. The terror was fresh. So you learned to navigate. You developed what scholars later called the culture of dissemblance, a protective practice of hiding your true feelings, your real opinions, your authentic self behind a mask of deference and compliance. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You said yes, ma'am, when every cell in your body wanted to say something else entirely. You made yourself smaller, quieter, less threatening, because visibility could be fatal. This wasn't cowardice, it was intelligence. It was the accumulated wisdom of generations of black women who'd figured out how to survive in a world designed to destroy them. But here's the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Within this crushing system, black women built worlds. They created spaces of love and resistance and joy that white supremacy couldn't touch. The church was one such space. On Sunday mornings, you put on your best dress, the one you'd sewn yourself from flour sacks and imagination, and you walked into a building where your humanity was never questioned. The preacher spoke of freedom, using biblical language that everyone understood, had double meanings. The choir sang songs that had carried your ancestors through slavery and would carry you through this. For a few hours, you were seen. You were valued. You were beloved of God. The music alone was worth everything. Songs that had been passed down through generations, spirituals that encoded messages of escape and resistance, hymns that promised a better world even if you couldn't reach it in this life. When the whole congregation lifted their voices together, something happened that's hard to describe. The walls seemed to expand. The ceiling seemed to lift. For those few minutes, you weren't tired, you weren't scared, you weren't invisible. You were part of something larger than yourself, connected to everyone who had sung these songs before and everyone who would sing them after. The church gave you back your name when the world tried to take it away. Sunday was also the one day you could truly rest. After service, families gathered for meals, spreading food across makeshift tables in the churchyard or packing into someone's home. These were the moments when laughter came easily, when children ran wild without fear, when adults could set down their masks and be fully themselves. The women traded stories and recipes. The men talked, politics in low voices, debating strategy and timing, and how long the current order could possibly last. Young people flirted under the watchful eyes of their elders. Old people sat in corners and remembered, their presence a living link to the time before, when things were even harder, and somehow people survived anyway. Women's clubs and mutual aid societies were another kind of sanctuary. Black women organized themselves into groups that provided everything from burial insurance to scholarships to emergency assistance for families in crisis. They raised money for schools, lobbied for better conditions, and created networks of support that stretched across communities. The National Association of Colored Women, founded in 1896, brought together local clubs into a national movement with the motto "Lifting as we climb." These weren't social gatherings for ladies with too much time. They were survival infrastructure, built brick by women who refused to wait for the white world to save them. And in your own home, in that small cabin with the corn husk mattress and the temperamental stove, you created something precious. You told your children they were smart and beautiful and capable of anything, even when the world told them otherwise. You taught them history that schools wouldn't teach, stories of resistance and triumph that proved black people had always been more than victims. You braided your daughter's hair and told her she was descended from queens. You looked at your son and told him his life mattered, preparing him for a world that would insist it didn't, while also preparing him to survive that world long enough to change it. The emotional labor was immense. You carried not just your own trauma, but the trauma of everyone around you. You were the one who held the family together when your husband came home broken by another day of degradation. You were the one who explained to your children why they couldn't drink from certain fountains, couldn't swim in certain pools, couldn't be children in the carefree way white children were. You were the one who absorbed the fear and the rage and the grief and somehow transmuted it into something your family could survive. This work is invisible in most histories. It was the most important work of all. Your body bore the evidence of all this carrying. By 40, you moved like a woman twice your age. Your hands were rough as leather. Your back never fully straightened anymore. You'd lost teeth because dental care was a luxury. You had pains you didn't mention to anyone, because mentioning them wouldn't help and might worry your family. The average life expectancy for black women in this era was significantly shorter than for white women, and the gap wasn't genetics. It was the accumulated weight of discrimination pressing down year after year until something gave out. But you kept going. Every morning, you swung your legs over the side of that bed, felt the rough wooden floor under your feet, and started again. You did it for your children, yes, but also for yourself, for the stubborn insistence that your life meant something even when everything around you said otherwise. You did it because giving up wasn't actually an option. The alternative to survival was death, and death meant the system won. So you lived, defiantly, exhaustedly, gloriously. The resistance took many forms. Sometimes it was the quiet sabotage of slowing down work, breaking things accidentally on purpose, taking small revenges that couldn't be traced. Sometimes it was the open defiance of women like Ida B. Wells, who documented lynching with meticulous fury and dared white America to look at what it was doing. Sometimes it was the organized resistance of the civil rights movement, which was built on the labor of black women long before it had famous male spokesmen. Rosa Parks didn't just spontaneously decide to keep her seat on that bus. She was a trained organizer with years of activist work behind her. The movement that changed America was planned in church basements and kitchen tables by women whose names most people never learned. And sometimes resistance was simply survival. Getting up each day, raising children, maintaining love in the face of hatred. These weren't passive acts. They were radical affirmations of humanity in a system designed to deny it. Every black woman who lived through Jim Crow and came out the other side with her spirit intact was a revolutionary, whether she ever marched in a protest or not. The night is settling in now, and you're finally lying down. The corn husks crinkle beneath you. Your husband's breathing has steadied into sleep. Through the thin walls, you can hear the sounds of the neighborhood quieting down. A dog barks somewhere. A baby cries briefly and is soothed. The air smells like wood smoke and the jasmine that grows wild along the fence line. Tomorrow, you'll wake before dawn and do it all again. The Henderson house, the scrubbing, the careful navigation of danger, the long walk home. It never ends, this work of staying alive. But tonight, in this small space you've carved out of a hostile world, you let yourself rest. Your body is tired in ways that sleep can't fix, but you close your eyes anyway. Maybe you dream of your grandmother, who was born in slavery and somehow survived to hold you as a baby and tell you stories about a time before the war. She used to say that freedom wasn't a place you arrived at, but a thing you built, day by day, choice by choice. One small act of dignity at a time. You didn't understand her then. You're starting to understand her now. Maybe you dream of your children grown and free, living in a world you can barely imagine, where they walk through front doors and drink from any fountain, and their children's children have never known the weight you carry. Maybe you dream of nothing at all, your mind finally empty, your body finally still. The Jim Crow era lasted roughly from the 1870s to the 1960s. Nearly 100 years of systematic degradation, terror, and oppression. And black women carried that weight every single day, in their bodies and their spirits and their bones. They carried it while also carrying families, communities, and the seeds of a freedom movement that would eventually bring the whole rotten system down. So tonight, as you lie in your modern bed, with your modern comforts, with laws that, at least on paper, say you're equal, with doors that open to you that once were closed, spare a thought for those women. The ones who scrubbed floors and bit their tongues and walked past buses that wouldn't stop for them. The ones who buried children and endured violations and still somehow found the strength to love and hope and fight. They built the world you live in now with their hands, their hearts, their impossible resilience. They didn't just survive Jim Crow. They outlasted it. And that's not just history, that's a miracle. One exhausted, stubborn, glorious day at a time.